Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. You gotta love those after lunch session, right? It doesn't matter what I say over here. You guys are gonna be asleep anyway. So I'm indeed from Google, where I had global product operations of our ads business in EMEA. I think of us as somewhere in between product engineering and sales, making sure that the customer experience is there. I decided to illustrate the big data element with an iceberg for two main reasons, to basically illustrate two viewpoints. On the one thing, all those people who work with technology understand that a lot of things need to be getting right in terms of the infrastructure, the pipeline, basically all the plumbing that's required for businesses to work with data. So that's under the surface. But on the other side, from the business point of view, unless they have data that they can access, is visualized properly, and is actually aligned to the business, then they can't do anything with it. So it's important to understand those two aspects. And from my experience before Google at Skype, we very much focused just on the technical side, forgot the tip of the side, and eventually turned it from a data transformation into a cultural transformation. So my focus today is going to be more on what's above the iceberg, and I'm going to talk a lot about elements which sound abstract, intangible, and that's what actually makes all this digital transformation that you hear about so difficult. Let's move. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to myself so you'll know the biases that I come with me, and then we talk briefly about the data at Google. Then I'm going to take you through the changed landscape in technology, business, and people that is now knocking on its door on the legacy ways of working, organizations, and so on. And then I'm going to talk about the last mile of big data, basically the tip of the iceberg, how to ensure that all the work that we're doing underneath actually gets used and drives value. Value to the customers, value to society, and obviously value to the business. So, I've worked in various industries, but primarily focused on the telco and internet spaces, a little bit of time in finance and healthcare. In terms of the functions, I try to work in as many functions as possible. I would say right now that these functions are starting to merge as well, and if there's one thing that all these functions have is the extensive use of data and transformation and change. So I think they're all closer together. In terms of my education, I'm an engineer, but augmented that with a business degree, worked all the way from Google to the Walt Disney World, from Seattle and to London, where I'm currently based. My company has also changed names recently. We're now under a new holding structure called Alphabet. Google is just but one of those companies under the Alphabet family, probably obviously the biggest one, I think responsible more or less for 95% in terms of both headcount and revenue. But we have other companies that have nascent technologies such as Nest, Google Life Sciences, Google X, and so on. The reason for this restructuring is it's sometimes much easier to have more independent and loosely coupled organizations when they're trying to incubate new technology that it's not quite ready for servicing or product and so on. Not to say that it's impossible to do that in a regular public corporation that has quarterly earnings, but it's much easier this way, and I think we'll see more companies adopting this sort of structure. In terms of numbers, so we have about over 100 billion searches every month in Google, which requires us to crawl over 20 billion web pages a day, 6 billion hours watched on YouTube every month, 1.5 million activated Android devices every day out of 1.4 billion devices worldwide. Anybody wants to guess what the 0.25 is? It's actually seconds, and it's the average time for a Google query to respond. Just for comparison, blink of an eye is 0.10 of a second. So 2 blinks, and you've got your results. And in order to enable this sort of performance, scalability across the world throughout the tenure of Google, we had to build a very strong, powerful infrastructure. So we needed to create a better cloud for ourselves first in order for us to be able even to deliver the services that we deliver. The good news is that it's now offered to you as well. And if we look, if we go into exactly what I mean, if you look at the big data innovations of Google, then you could see from the Google filing systems all the way to what we have right now, these were tools that are being used internally, that are necessary for us to do our work properly and deliver those services. However, we've also published white papers on each one of those items, but we also externalize them. So Dremel, which is our big data offering, is BigQuery. And we've got Dataflow, which allows streaming of both batched and real-time events. And also the latest one, which is TensorFlow, which is our new infrastructure for machine learning, getting closer between our researchers, between researchers and application developers, and we're enabling it out externally as well. So basically, we're offering the entire life cycle of big data offering, all the way from capture, store, process, and analyze, working also with other open source platforms as well. Another important point over here is we built that cloud infrastructure for ourselves in order for us to do work better. We've also learned a lot of things along the way, and that's how to work better together between ourselves within the company, how to collaborate, how to communicate. And that's when we developed our tools, the Gmail, the Hangout, which we all use. So what Google for Work basically offers is not just those significant cloud infrastructure that enables companies to focus on what they do best, and that's the tip of the iceberg, while we take care of the rest. But also we have those tools from Docs for Hangouts to actually work better together, all the way to the front-end devices, Chromebooks, Chrome web browsers, and so on. And lastly, this is Susan, the CEO of YouTube. The fail culture is an important thing because in order for us to improve, we need to trial things. Now, I'm sure you've heard the saying of celebrating failure. I don't agree we need to celebrate failure, but we need to have those lessons learned from failed attempts, and that's what basically Susan is saying. Now I'm going to talk about the changing landscape, primarily from technology, but also the changes that it has on business and people. Technology, I see the three main issues of basically the data, the cloud, and mobility. Let's talk about cloud first. This is the global internet traffic from all the way 92 and projected from Cisco's Virtual Networking Index, from 100 gigabytes per day to over 16 terabytes a second, a massive increase in data. In terms of mobility, we reached from 1% penetration all the way to 73%. Again, massive increase. And if you also look in terms of and this is a study that's done by Ericsson, about how we use our phones, you'll find out that these are more mini computers than phones. However, we still call them phones. So that has created, occasions like that, which we thought of when we talked about social, to something like this, which is more current. From places where we search for information, look like that, and now we're going to Google. Now let's look at the business side and how business has transformed, again, through technology. I've got two tables over here. Both of them show the largest market capitalization of companies, 1996 on the left-hand side, and 2015 on the right-hand side. So if you focus on the left-hand side, you'll see that of the top 20 companies, the pure technology company over there, the only one is HP, and that's in number 20. So we can't even see it here. But shift your eyes to 2015, to the right-hand side, and you'll see that out of the top 10, 4 of those companies are pure tech companies, two of which occupy the first two steps. If you ask yourself, where's HP now, it's actually number 90. So the business model has changed as well. I'm sure some of you have seen this phrase coined in LinkedIn and other social networks. Just if we take Uber as an example, largest taxi company owns no vehicles. So that approach, or there needs to be some sort of understanding that the business models have changed as well. And here's another great example from the hotel industry. These are the largest hotel chains. You see Intercontinental Hotels, 65 years in the business, has approximately 645,000 rooms and in about 100 countries. Look at Airbnb. In 4 years, surpassed them in number of rooms and almost double the amount of countries. And we can go further with couchsurfing and so on. Now let's look at the important part. I think the most important part, which is people. This is a chart from the UN, shows the urban population versus the rural population of the 100-year period from 1950 to 2050. The line in the middle is where we are right now. It's pretty clear to see that rural population is flattening out or actually going down, with urban population going up, meaning more people with the same sort of approach, always on, always connected, similar way of living. Now, to that, it's the best of times, but it's also in the worst of times. I don't know if you heard about that, but this actually demonstrates how we live right now. If you just go to a coffee shop, drink coffee, no devices, no digital, you may be considered a psychopath. That's the worst of times. Now let's talk about the workplace. We hear the term millennials, right? People who grew up into the digital age, into the internet, and so on. And when we asked, what do millennials care about work? It's meaningful work, impact, influence, be something, do something. When we ask their managers, what do they think is most important for them? It's money. And that sort of tension is an issue that we need to solve in our business. Now, millennial, as far as I'm concerned, is not about age. It's about mindset. So if you're 40, above 40 or not, it doesn't mean that you're irrelevant in the workplace, in the modern workplace. It's a mindset thing, it's not an age thing. So what does all this mean? These are two articles or two front pages from The Economist. Technology has changed, business has changed, people have changed. It's time now to change the companies as well, and they're not moving fast enough. These are just a few quotes, one of them from Accenture, the other one from Jeff Immelt, the CEO of GE, saying something that I truly believe in. Every company will be a software analytics company, or at least have that capability built in. Because if they don't have that capability, they're not taking advantage of the scale, the cloud, and the data that we have. So what can we do about it? I've talked about a few items, and these are a few that we're going to talk with the 8.2524, this is a scary thing that we have left. First, it's important to understand that there always needs to be a balance between the art and the science. And I'll go again to my example in Skype. Initially, we thought the transformation should focus on data, on technology, then we moved into culture. But it's not just a one-time move. You always need to shift between focusing on technical sides, people sides, sometimes many times a day, in order to get things right. That's what's required from leadership and management today. It's not just a deterministic way of leading. And because in a digital world everything is connected, the same is true for businesses as well. So strategy cannot be over there and operations on the other side. Everything is much closer. Nothing can live in isolation anymore. Let's start with the customer. This is what Steve Jobs said, the great tech person saying that technology is merely an enabler to drive value to the business, to the customers, and to society. What's the one tip that we use currently in Google and in the past? I always ask the team members and everyone else, on every activity that you do, how is the customer better off? And sometimes I get the answer is, well, we're too far off, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't influence the customer. No. There has to be a certain way that whatever activity you do, in whichever function you are, needs to scale all the way up to the customer and provide some sort of value. Otherwise, what are we doing that for? So that sort of mindset is what customer centricity is all about. We talk about data. Now, huge internet companies such as Google, we have billions of users, hundreds of millions of users. We can't talk with each one on a one-to-one basis. Our primary way of communication is through metrics. That's when we know if the users are happy, if not, if what we developed is good or bad. And that's the same thing that goes for innovation, experimentation, looking how the dial changes with the actions that you take. And that's where the last mile of big data comes in. Data is king for sure, but data needs to have the proper context as well, and the culture is what marries between the two properly. Because sometimes you could have people presenting whatever, and people are not engaged, and they just go with it. You don't know exactly what the data is, and in some cases, People don't even know and don't even talk about anything that's considered with data, and they still go away with it. But one of the most interesting things in business is the Hippo effect. Hippo, the highest paid person opinions in the room. You can bring all the data in the world, but if you have that hierarchy culture, if ranking is what matters, then you have a problem. Now, there's also issues of being data-driven, so letting data drive the decisions, and having something which I call driven data, which is data driven by a narrative. An executive would look at the data, massage it a bit, fits to his narrative, then presents. Very challenging. So what can we do about it? We need to change, we need to transform all the time, challenge new legacy operating model, and I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to talk primarily about organic adoption. I've led change and delivered it in Skype, in Microsoft, and currently in Google. If there's one thing that's always true, is that you can't force anyone to do anything. It's impossible. You would think they would understand that, but not. The only way to drive change and to make it stick is by opting for organic adoption. The people need to see the value in what you're offering and opt in. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Then, agility is important. There's a time of detailed project plans when we know what we're going to do 6 months from now are over. We need to be much more agile and solve the problem rather than planning to solve it. And that goes also to the strategy of planning. I think Mike Tyson, the famous boxer, once said that every boxer comes to the ring with a great strategy until they get a punch in the face. So things change. Focus is an important thing, especially with the abundance of data out there. People tend to lose focus, and it's important to ensure that we remain on target. So I said we need to be agile. We don't need detailed project plans, but we need to have some sort of roadmap that everybody understands and buys into. Because this is what happens. That's the challenge that we're facing now, not just in our personal life, but also in the work. A lot of money is being wasted on it. So, the important element is culture, what I definitely believe in, and also my executive chairman believes in. Why? So, this is something inspired by HubSpot, another company. This is the difference in people's desires, or workers' desires. So in the past, we wanted pension and paycheck. Now, again, we said we want purpose, we want meaning, we want impact, but also paycheck. The hours, the workplace, the tenure have all changed. Do we really need to be in the office from 9 to 5? Does anybody actually measure time and take it into consideration with efficiency? No. Things are changing. And it's also important to understand, once we made all those changes, once we opted for the organic change, once people get the value that we're saying, it's not a one-time fix. It always needs to be reminded, communicated, otherwise it goes away. It's exactly like humans, right? If we don't stick to something, we're going to let it go. Not a lot of basketball fans here, right? No. But this, eventually it's all those things that are talked together eventually are going into teams. Teams, I think, is the basic unit of the organization, not the individuals. And if you have a proper team, you can live through this uncertainty easily. This team is the Cleveland Cavaliers from the NBA in the Americas. They had last year one of the worst years possible. Injuries, different players not being able to play, new coach that never coached in the NBA, and yet they've managed to reach the finals again because they were agile. They changed the strategy all the time, and they had a different strategy and a way of operating according to which resources was available. Now, if you don't get that, I think the same thing could be said on this team, right? Yeah, more familiar, maybe. I don't know. You're being quiet. So, takeaways with 1 minute to go. Technology, business, and people have changed. Now it's time for organizations to change. They have not merely changed enough. The last mile of big data, that tip of the iceberg, I think is what matters. Because unless you visualize things, unless you work with the business to ensure that they really work with data, then what's all the infrastructure for? And then, again, it's the data is king, context is queen, culture is what marries the two. Culture is key for collaboration, for innovation, for all those elements. It's hard to see, but it's there. You feel it in the org. And obviously, in huge organizations, you've got subcultures, but it's important to find that universal one. Mindset, think customer. Where's the value to the customer? Change, opt for organic, focus on solving the problem, not planning to solve it. And again, leverage Google's tested approach, not just for the data infrastructure, but also for how we work together. How can we bring those products and services to the market and drive innovation through our platforms? And again, you have the control. Because what I see sometimes, a lot of huge incumbent organizations are afraid. They're saying those startups are disrupting us. We don't have any power. Yes, you do. You have the money, you have the resources, you can do it. So I'll end with focus on the user and all else will follow. You deliver value to someone, somewhere, you'll get eventually that value back in economical terms. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much.